The champagne glasses clinked somewhere behind me. Laughter bubbling through conversations I wasn't part of. I adjusted my camera settings, scanning the ballroom through the viewfinder for the next shot worth capturing. Thursday nights at the plaza meant wealthy donors pretending to care about whatever cause justified the open bar. My job was to make them look generous. I'd been shooting events like this for 3 years, ever since I bought my freedom from the corporate studio in Portland that treated photographers like assembly line workers. The pay was inconsistent, but at least the work was mine. Tonight's gig would cover rent with maybe $50 left over. Brooklyn wasn't getting any cheaper. At 11 o'clock, the event coordinator dismissed me with a distracted wave. I packed my gear quickly, eager to escape before someone asked me to stay late without additional payment. Outside the hotel entrance, I stopped short. The storm had rolled in fast. Water poured from the sky in sheets, turning the street into a river. I hadn't checked the forecast. Stupid. My weather app sat ignored on my phone while I'd been busy framing shots of people who could afford to throw away more money in one evening than I made in 3 months. I pulled my jacket tighter and ran for the parking garage across the street, camera bag clutched against my chest like a shield. The structure was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners where the overhead fixtures had burned out weeks ago. My Honda Civic waited in the far corner where I'd parked to avoid the valet fee. Halfway there, movement caught my eye. A man in a charcoal suit stumbled near a concrete pillar, one hand pressed against it for balance. He straightened quickly, too quickly, and strode toward a black SUV idling near the elevator bank. His gait was wrong, controlled, but tense, like someone fighting pain they didn't want to show. Something dark and rectangular tumbled from his pocket as he walked. Leather, expensive looking. It hit the ground with a soft thud that I only heard because I'd stopped moving. "Hey," I called out. "You dropped." The SUV's door slammed. Engine noise echoed through the concrete space as the vehicle pulled away, taillights disappearing down the exit ramp before I could finish my sentence. The man never looked back. I approached the fallen object slowly, irrationally nervous despite being alone. It was a wallet. Fine leather, worn smooth at the edges from use, the kind of thing that probably cost more than my camera bag. I should have turned it into hotel security. That's what a smart person would have done. Instead, I picked it up and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Just until I got home, I told myself. Just until I could figure out who it belonged to and how to return it. The drive back to Brooklyn took 40 minutes through rain that refused to let up. My apartment building looked worse than usual under the storm's assault, water streaming from broken gutters and pooling around the foundation. I splashed through puddles to the entrance, juggling my camera bag and keys. Inside my studio apartment, I dropped everything on the kitchen counter and stared at the wallet. Opening someone else's property felt like a violation. But how else was I supposed to return it? The license was first. Julian Fioraldi, age 34. Address in Tribeca that probably meant penthouse money. Dark hair, strong features, eyes so dark they looked black in the DMV photo. The kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, not government identification. Behind the license, crisp $100 bills. I counted 20 of them. $2,000 carried casually in a pocket. I left them untouched. Then I found the photograph. It was a Polaroid, faded and creased from years of handling. The image showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with blonde hair caught by sunlight. She wore a yellow dress, the kind with small white flowers embroidered around the collar. In her arms, she clutched a brown teddy bear with one missing eye. I knew that bear. I knew that dress. I knew the wooden fence in the background and the apple tree just visible at the frame's edge. My hands started shaking. The photo had been taken in my grandmother's backyard. I remembered the day with perfect clarity despite being so young. My mother had made me put on the stupid dress even though I wanted to wear jeans. I'd been crying about leaving the bear behind when we drove home. My father promised we'd come back for it. We never did. 3 weeks after that photo was taken, my parents died in a car accident on Route 26. Brake failure, the police said. Tragic and unavoidable. I was 8 years old. My aunts raised me after that. Both of them gone now. Cancer taking one and a stroke the other. I was alone in the world, except for a handful of acquaintances I called friends. and a best friend who'd stuck around despite my tendency to cancel plans when work got busy. But this photo, this impossible, unexplainable photograph. Why did a stranger named Julian Fioraldi have a picture of me as a child? A picture I'd never known existed? I set the wallet aside and opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Julian Fioraldi's digital footprint was surprisingly small for someone who carried $2,000 in cash. A few articles mentioned him as a businessman attending charity functions. Photos showed him at galas, always in expensive suits, always with a reserved expression that revealed nothing. Then I found the forum posts, a true crime discussion board. Users debating organized crime families in the Northeast. Julian Fioraldi's name appeared in a thread about new generation leadership. The posts were vague, dancing around direct accusations, but the implication was clear. I slammed the laptop shut and pressed my palms against my eyes. This couldn't be real. The photo, the money, the hints of criminal connections. It felt like stumbling into someone else's nightmare. Sleep didn't come. I lay in bed watching shadows shift across the ceiling, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the photo had been bought at an estate sale. Maybe it wasn't even me, just a child who looked similar. Maybe I was losing my mind from stress and too many double shifts. None of those explanations held water. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would return the wallet. Keep the photo for now, just until I understood what was happening. If Julian Fioraldi wanted it back, he could explain why he had it first. Friday crawled past in a haze. I went through the motions at a corporate headshot session, adjusting lights and forcing smiles while my mind spun in circles. Around noon, I called my Saturday client and canceled, claiming a stomach bug. The lie came easily. The guilt came harder when I thought about the lost income. Lunch with Vanessa at our usual cafe near Prospect Park. She ordered a quinoa bowl and studied me across the table with narrowed eyes. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "What's wrong?" "Just tired." I pushed lettuce around my plate. "Work's been busy. You're a terrible liar, Haley." She set down her fork. "Did something happen?" "Nothing I can explain right now." I met her gaze. "But I'm okay, I promise." She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. We'd been friends since college, long enough that she knew when to push and when to give me space. Today, she chose space. I got back to my apartment around 3 and found the SUV. Black, tinted windows, idling at the curb directly in front of my building. Same make and model as the one from last night, though I couldn't be certain it was the same vehicle. My stomach dropped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, older than Julian, maybe 40, with silver threading through dark hair. He wore a dark suit and moved with the economical grace of someone who'd spent time in the military, or worse. "Miss Turner?" His voice was professionally neutral. "My name is Anthony Caruso. I work for Mr. Fioraldi. He'd like to thank you personally for recovering his property and request the pleasure of your company for dinner this evening." Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I heard myself ask, "How did you find me?" "Your license plate was captured on parking garage security cameras. Mr. Fioraldi has resources." Anthony's expression remained unchanging. "He means you no harm. Simply wishes to express his gratitude and perhaps answer questions you might have." The photograph burned in my pocket where I'd been carrying it all day. Questions. I had hundreds of them. "What time?" I asked. 8 o'clock. "I'll return to collect you at 7:30. He handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number embossed in black ink. "If you prefer to decline, call this number. No pressure will be applied." He drove away before I could respond. I stood on the sidewalk holding the card, wondering what I'd just agreed to. Anthony returned at 7:30 sharp. The SUV's interior smelled like leather and something I couldn't identify. Maybe gun oil. I sat in the back seat clutching my camera bag like a security blanket, the wallet heavy in my jacket pocket. The photograph pressed against my hip, a constant reminder of why I was doing this insane thing. The restaurant was tucked into a quiet street in Lower Manhattan, the kind of place without a sign out front. You either knew about it, or you didn't belong there. Anthony held the door open, and I stepped into warm amber lighting. and the murmur of hushed conversations. A hostess led me through the main dining room toward a private alcove in the back. Black pants, green blouse. I'd changed 3 times before settling on something that didn't scream either desperation or defiance. My hands were steady now, even though my pulse hammered in my throat. Julian Fioreldi stood when I approached. Taller than I'd expected, maybe 6'2", with dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in old Italian paintings. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes so dark brown they looked black in the low light. The charcoal suit fit him like it had been made specifically for his body. Probably had been. "Miss Turner." He extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." His grip was firm, warm, and brief. Professional. I sat across from him, hyper-aware of every movement, every breath. "I have your wallet." I pulled it from my pocket and set it on the white tablecloth between us. Everything's still inside except the photograph. His gaze dropped to the wallet, then back to my face. "You kept the photo. I need to know why you have it." My voice came out stronger than I felt. "That's me. When I was 8 years old, 3 weeks before my parents died." Something flickered across his expression, too quick to read. "I know." A waiter appeared with wine, poured without asking. Disappeared. I didn't touch the glass. 19 years ago, Julian began, his voice low and controlled. "I had a brother, Dante. He was 15 years older than me, which made him 30 when he died. I was only 15. I stayed silent, watching him. Dante was involved in operations I didn't fully understand at the time. Dangerous work, tracking people, gathering information. He came to me one night, pressed something into my hand. Julian's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his wine glass, told me to keep it safe, that if anything happened to him, someone would need to know the truth eventually. "The photograph," I said. "The photograph." 2 weeks later, Dante was killed in a confrontation with members of a criminal organization. I was just a kid trying to understand why my brother was dead. I kept that photo like he asked, waited for someone to come looking for it. No one ever did. Before he died, Dante left a note with the photo. Julian added, his voice roughening for the first time. 2 lines. "From Robert Morgan. For her if I don't make it. He didn't say how your father found him, only that the picture had to reach you one day. I kept it because a promise to the dead is still a promise." My throat felt tight. "What does my family have to do with your brother's death?" "That's what I've spent 19 years trying to understand." He leaned forward slightly. "Your parents died the same month as Dante." "Car accident," the police said. "Brake failure on Route 26. "How do you know that?" "I've made it my business to know." No apology in his tone. "I researched everyone connected to Dante's final operation. Your parents' names appeared in his notes. When they died under suspicious circumstances weeks after him, I started asking questions. The room felt smaller suddenly, airless. What kind of questions? The kind that get police investigations shut down. The kind that make evidence disappear. Julian's jaw tightened. Your parents' accident wasn't investigated properly. Someone with power wanted it buried. The same someone who likely had Dante killed. I pressed my palms flat against the table, needing something solid. Why? I don't know yet. But I have resources now that I didn't have as a 15-year-old. If you want answers, I can help you find them. And what do you get out of this? He held my gaze. The truth about what killed my brother. And possibly justice, though I won't pretend that means the same thing to me as it does to you. The weight of his words settled over me. This man, this stranger with his expensive suit and dangerous connections, was offering me something I'd wanted my entire adult life without even knowing it. Answers. Understanding. The chance to prove that the hollow feeling in my chest whenever I thought about my parents wasn't just grief, but instinct screaming that their deaths had never made sense. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course." He withdrew a business card from his jacket, set it beside the wallet. "My private number. Call when you're ready." I stood, leaving the wine untouched. The photo. "I'm keeping it until I understand what's happening. It belongs to you, more than it ever belonged to me." He remained seated, watching me with those unsettling dark eyes. "Miss Turner, whatever you decide, be careful. If someone wanted your parents dead 19 years ago, they might not appreciate you asking questions now. The warning followed me out of the restaurant and into the night. I spent Saturday morning staring at my ceiling, then made a decision. If Julian had spent 19 years investigating my parents, he knew more than I did. But I needed to verify his story, find my own evidence before trusting a man who admitted to having dangerous connections. Sunday morning, I drove to the storage facility in Queens, where I'd stashed boxes after my second aunt died 3 years ago. Most of it was junk, things I couldn't bear to throw away but didn't want cluttering my apartment. But somewhere in those boxes were my aunt's files, and maybe something about my parents. The unit smelled like cardboard and dust. I pulled the chain on the overhead bulb and started searching. 2 hours later, my hands were filthy, and my knees ached from kneeling on concrete. But I'd found what I was looking for. The insurance policy hit me first. I'd never thought to question how my aunts paid for raising me. Now I knew. My parents had a life insurance policy, but the beneficiary wasn't my aunts. It was a company called Meridian Holdings, LLC, a name that meant nothing to me. Next came the newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. The headline read, "Local couple dies in tragic accident." I'd seen it before, but this time I read every word. Brake failure. Route 26. Survived by daughter, age 8. What I'd missed before was the small addendum printed 2 days later. Barely 3 lines noting that further investigation had been deemed unnecessary by the district attorney's office. Someone had scrawled in the margin, "Pressure from promotoria, file closed." My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. My mother's handwriting, addressed to her sister Margaret. "I'm afraid the decisions we made years ago are catching up to us. Robert thinks I'm being paranoid, but I can't shake this feeling of being watched. If anything happens, please protect our daughter. Tell her we loved her. Tell her we tried to do the right thing, even when it cost us everything." The letter was dated 2 weeks before they died. At the bottom of the box, I found a partially burned document. Most of it was destroyed, but I could make out fragments. Property, Manhattan, trust, a name that might have been a law firm, though the last part was ash. I photographed everything with my phone, hands still trembling. Then I pulled out Julian's card and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Turner, I found something. Documents about my parents. An insurance policy that doesn't make sense. A letter from my mother. Mentions of a property I never knew existed. Where are you?" "Storage facility in Queens, but I'm heading home." "Don't." His tone shifted, urgent. "Send me the address. I'm sending someone to collect you." "I have my car." "Leave it. This isn't a request." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, Anthony pulled up in the same black SUV. I climbed in without argument, the manila folder of documents clutched to my chest. Monday morning, I found myself in a Tribeca penthouse that probably cost more than I'd earn in my lifetime. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson, morning light turning the river silver. The space was minimalist, expensive, controlled, just like the man who owned it. Julian stood at a conference table with another man, both examining the documents I'd brought. Anthony hovered nearby, phone constantly buzzing with messages he ignored. "Meridian Holdings," the other man said. His nameplate read, "Anthony Caruso. Consigliere," whatever that meant. Shell Corporation registered in Delaware. Common structure for money laundering operations. "Linked to what organization?" Julian asked. "Give me an hour." Anthony pulled out his phone, stepped away. Julian turned to me. "The letter from your mother. She mentions decisions made in the past. Do you know what she was referring to?" "No. My aunts never talked about it. I was 8 when they took me in. They focused on keeping me stable, not on the past." "And you never questioned the circumstances?" "I was a child." Defensiveness sharpened my voice. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, my aunts were dying. I had other priorities. He nodded slowly. "The property mentioned in the burned document. That's new information. If your parents owned property in Manhattan that you never knew about, someone has been hiding it from you." Anthony returned, face grim. Meridian Holdings was a front for the Sinaloa cartel's predecessor organization. Shut down 15 years ago when the leadership changed hands, but the shell companies remained active. The room tilted slightly. I grabbed the edge of the table. The cartel, I said slowly. My parents were connected to the cartel? Or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time? Julian's voice was carefully neutral. My brother Dante was infiltrating that organization when he died. If your parents witnessed something, knew something, the cartel would have eliminated them as loose ends. And me? You were 8 years old, not a threat. Until now. Anthony's phone buzzed again. He answered, listened, and his expression darkened further. We have a problem. Intercepted communication shows the current Sinaloa leadership knows about Haley. They know you've made contact with her. Julian's jaw tightened. When? Intercept was from this morning. They're treating her as a potential liability. A liability? My voice cracked. I don't know anything. They don't know that. Julian moved around the table toward me. They see a connection to a 19-year-old incident that cost them assets and personnel. They see me taking an interest. That makes you dangerous in their eyes. So what am I supposed to do? You stay here, under protection, until we can neutralize the threat or convince them you're not worth the risk. I have a life, a job. I can't just disappear. You'll be dead in 48 hours if you go back to your apartment. No dramatics, just cold fact. These aren't people who take chances. I stared at him, at Anthony, at the documents scattered across the table. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where would I go? And how long before someone found me? How long? I asked. Days, maybe a week, however long it takes. Julian's dark eyes held mine. I'm asking you to trust me with your life. I thought about my parents, dead on a lonely stretch of highway. About Dante, killed trying to stop people like this. About the little girl in the yellow dress who'd had no idea her world was about to shatter. Fine, I whispered. I'll stay. Monday morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the penthouse windows. I'd barely slept on the guest room bed that felt too soft, too expensive, too much like a cage disguised as luxury. My phone buzzed for the 7th time since dawn. Vanessa. I sent another text claiming food poisoning from bad sushi, promising to call when I felt better. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. She'd been my best friend since sophomore year at SVA. The person who'd helped me move 3 times, who'd held me when my second aunt died. Now I was lying to her because the truth would sound insane. What was I supposed to say? I'm hiding from a drug cartel in a mafia boss's penthouse because my dead parents might have witnessed something 19 years ago? She'd either think I'd lost my mind or call the police, neither of which would help. The penthouse was bigger than my entire apartment building. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen I'd never learned to use. An office where Julian conducted business I deliberately didn't think too hard about. Men came and went throughout the day, always in dark clothing, always speaking in low tones that cut off when I appeared. I set up my laptop in the guest room and opened my editing software. 3 client sessions waiting for final touches. Another 2 who'd emailed asking about rescheduling. I crafted careful responses blaming illness, offered partial refunds, watched my already precarious income evaporate. The corporate headshots needed color correction. I lost myself in the work, adjusting exposure and contrast until my eyes burned. It was easier than thinking about how much money I was losing. Easier than calculating how long I could survive without new bookings. Around noon, I ventured into the kitchen. Anthony was there, coffee in hand, phone pressed to his ear. He nodded acknowledgement, but didn't end his call. I grabbed water from the refrigerator and retreated. Julian found me in the guest room an hour later. I hadn't heard him knock, too focused on cropping a photo of some executive who'd wanted his double chin minimized. You should eat, he said from the doorway. Not hungry. You've been staring at that screen for 4 hours. I glanced at the clock. He was right. Work doesn't stop because I'm in hiding. He stepped inside, hands in his pockets. Still wore the suit, though he'd lost the jacket somewhere. The white shirt was perfectly pressed, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. How much are you losing by being here? The question surprised me. Why do you care? Because you're making a sacrifice to stay alive. I want to understand the cost. I saved my work and closed the laptop. This week? maybe $800 in missed sessions. Next week will be worse. I had a wedding booked, 50 prints ordered for a gallery showing. All gone. I'll cover your losses. I don't want your money. It's not charity. It's compensation for the danger my interest in your case has created. I stood, needing to move. The room felt smaller with him in it. Your interest didn't create this. Whoever killed my parents did. You're just helping me understand why. Something shifted in his expression. Too subtle to name. Most people in your position would be demanding compensation. I'm not most people. No. He watched me pace. You're not. That first week crawled by in measured increments of boredom and anxiety. I edited photos, fielded increasingly concerned messages from Vanessa, and avoided thinking about the men with guns positioned throughout the building. At night, the penthouse felt cavernous and silent, except for the occasional murmur of voices from Julian's office. On the fourth evening, I found him on the terrace. He stood at the railing, city lights spreading below like scattered diamonds, a glass of something amber in his hand. Can't sleep? I asked. He didn't startle. Must have heard me approach. Old habit. My father used to say sleep was for people who didn't have empires to maintain. I joined him at the railing, keeping a careful distance. Sounds exhausting. It was. He died when I was 17. Heart attack, they said. But hearts don't spontaneously fail from being shot twice in the chest. The casual way he said it made my breath catch. I'm sorry. Don't be. He knew the risks. Julian took a drink. My brother Dante died 2 years before that. I was 15, suddenly responsible for understanding a world I'd been sheltered from. By 17, I'd lost everyone except Anthony and a handful of men loyal to my father's memory. That's when you took over? Gradually. I was too young for anyone to take seriously. Spent 3 years proving I wasn't just my father's son, that I could think strategically, that I wouldn't get them all killed through inexperience. He turned to face me. By 20, I'd earned the right to lead. By 25, I'd eliminated everyone who doubted me. The last sentence hung in the air, weighted with implications I didn't want to examine. Do you ever regret it? Every day. But regret doesn't change reality. We stood in silence, watching traffic crawl through streets far below. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives, worrying about normal problems. I envied them. What about you? Julian asked. What was your life like before Thursday? Boring. Lonely. I worked, paid bills, occasionally saw Vanessa for lunch. My aunts raised me to be practical, self-sufficient. They didn't have much money, so I learned early that survival meant working harder than everyone else. Is that why you became a photographer? I became a photographer because I'm better at observing than participating. Behind the camera, I get to document life without actually living it. The admission came easier than expected. Pathetic, right? Honest. He finished his drink. Most people spend their lives pretending to be someone they're not. You at least acknowledge your distance. Over the following days, I started photographing Julian without planning to. He'd be working in his office, concentration etched into the lines of his face, and I'd capture it. Or standing by the windows, silhouette sharp against afternoon light. He noticed, but never asked me to stop. On day 10, Anthony burst into the living room where I'd been reviewing footage. His face was grim. We've got a name. Cristobal Cristo Vega, often anglicized as Christopher. He's the one who ordered the hit on your parents 19 years ago. He's climbed the ranks since then. Now controls distribution for the entire Northeast corridor. Julian appeared from his office. You're certain? Dante's journals mentioned a contact called Cristo. We've matched communications from that period to Vega's known operations. It's him. My hands went numb. Where is he? Protected. He's got his own security, his own territory. But he knows we're digging into his past. Anthony pulled up something on his tablet. He's planning to move against us before we can expose him. Julian's jaw tightened. Then we move first. They spent the next 2 days planning something they wouldn't explain in detail. I caught fragments. False documentation. Internal warfare. Turning the cartel against itself. It sounded insane and desperate and possibly brilliant. On day 11, Julian found me editing photos in the guest room again. I need your help, he said without preamble. With what? creating documents that appear authentic, financial records showing embezzlement. We need them good enough to pass initial scrutiny from people who want to believe the worst. I set down my laptop. You want me to help you fabricate evidence? Yes. That's illegal. So is murder. They've already committed their crime. This is how we respond. He stepped closer. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it. I'm asking if you're capable of doing it. Every instinct screamed to refuse. But Christopher Vega had killed my parents, had killed Dante, had probably killed dozens of others. And he'd do it again if given the chance. I'll need access to real documents for reference. Templates, formatting, the kind of details that make something look legitimate. Anthony can provide those. And if this goes wrong, if they trace it back to me, they won't. But if they do, you'll have protection. Julian held my gaze. I know what I'm asking. If you can't do it, tell me now. I thought about the little girl in the yellow dress who'd lost everything. About 19 years of questions that had never been answered. About the parents I barely remembered but still mourned. I'll do it. The next 2 days blurred together. Anthony brought templates and real financial documents. Things he claimed came from sources I didn't want to know about. I studied them, learning the patterns, the language, the subtle details that separated legitimate paperwork from obvious fakes. Julian worked beside me, explaining what the documents needed to prove. We fabricated a trail of embezzlement, carefully constructed to look like Christopher had been stealing from his own organization for years. The work was meticulous, demanding, and brought us into close proximity for hours at a time. I became aware of small things. The way he rolled his shoulders when concentration made them tense. How he drank coffee black but always offered me cream despite me never asking. The scar on his chin that I finally got close enough to notice, thin and white against tanned skin. Once, reaching for the same document, our hands brushed. The contact sent electricity up my arm that had nothing to do with fear. He pulled back first, jaw tight, and we didn't speak about it. By the end of day 12, we had everything we needed. 20 pages of fabricated financial records that would tear Christopher's world apart if his superiors believed them. This will work, Anthony said, reviewing our creation. It's good. Really good. Julian looked at me across the table. You've just helped start a war. Good, I said, surprised by the venom in my own voice. Let it burn. Sunday arrived with false hope. The documents had been leaked late Saturday through channels I didn't understand and didn't ask about. Anthony spent the morning monitoring cartel communications, reporting back in fragments that painted a picture of mounting chaos. Vega's lieutenants are questioning the finances. 3 separate calls demanding explanations he can't provide. Anthony scrolled through his tablet. Internal audit's been triggered. He's losing control. Julian stood by the windows, hands in his pockets. How long until he realizes it's fabricated? Days, maybe a week if we're lucky. But he'll act before then. Desperate men make reckless choices. I tried to focus on editing photos, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow through the windows felt like a threat materializing. By nightfall, my nerves were stripped raw. Around midnight, Julian found me attempting to work in the guest room and failing miserably. You should sleep, he said. Can't. Keep thinking about what happens if your plan doesn't work. He leaned against the doorframe. Then we adapt. I've survived worse. Have I? The question came out sharper than intended. I'm a photographer. 2 weeks ago, my biggest problem was affording rent. Now I'm hiding from cartels and fabricating evidence. This isn't my world. No, but you're handling it better than most would. Before I could respond, the alarm screamed. Every window, every door, every access point shrieked in overlapping tones that burrowed into my skull. Julian moved instantly, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the hallway. His grip was iron, purpose driving every motion. Stay behind me. His voice cut through the noise. Don't argue, don't hesitate, just move. We reached the hallway as Anthony emerged from his room, gun already drawn. 2 other guards materialized from positions I hadn't known they occupied, weapons ready, faces grim. 6 hostiles breaching ground floor, Anthony said, pressing a finger to his earpiece. Security's engaging. The sound of gunfire erupted from below. Not like movies, sharper, more violent, punctuated by shouting I couldn't decipher. My legs turned to water. Julian's hand on my back kept me upright, kept me moving toward what he called the safe room. The penthouse had a reinforced panic room I'd never seen. Julian keyed in a code and shoved me inside. Stay here. Don't come out until I personally tell you it's clear. Wait. The door sealed, cutting off my protest. I was alone in a windowless box with a monitor showing security feeds. My breath came too fast, vision swimming at the edges. On screen, I watched chaos unfold. Men in dark clothing traded gunfire with Julian's security in the lobby. Muzzle flashes lit the feed in strobing patterns. One of Julian's guards went down, clutching his leg. Another dragged him behind cover. The invaders advanced, methodical and professional. Then reinforcements arrived. More of Julian's men pouring from exits I hadn't known existed, surrounding the attackers from multiple angles. The invaders retreated fast, abandoning their wounded advance. Within minutes, they'd fled. The all-clear didn't come for 20 minutes. When Julian finally opened the safe room door, his face was carved from stone. It's over. They're gone. I stumbled out on shaking legs. Your man who went down. Leg wound. He'll live. Julian turned away. Anthony's handling cleanup. I followed him to his office where he sank into the chair behind his desk. That's when I noticed the blood. A dark stain spreading across his left shirt sleeve, dripping onto the expensive wood. You're hurt. I crossed the room before thinking. It's nothing. Piece of broken glass when a window shattered. Let me see it. Haley, let me see it. I grabbed his arm, not gently. He winced but didn't pull away. The cut ran along his forearm, maybe 3 inches long. Deep enough to need attention, shallow enough that he'd been ignoring it. I grabbed tissues from the desk, pressed them against the wound. His blood soaked through immediately, warm and too red. You could have been killed, I said, hands trembling as I applied pressure. But I wasn't. That's not the point. My voice cracked. None of this was supposed to happen. You said I'd be safe here. I was wrong. The admission came quietly. I miscalculated how fast Vega would move. I put you in danger. I looked up and found him watching me with an intensity that stopped my breath. We were too close. His blood on my hands, adrenaline still screaming through my veins. The space between us felt electric, charged with everything we hadn't said. His free hand came up, cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. I'm sorry, he whispered. I leaned in. So did he. Our mouths were inches apart when Anthony burst through the door. Boss, we've got a problem. Police are on their way. Neighbors called in the gunfire. Julian pulled back, jaw tightening. How long? 5 minutes, maybe less. He stood, all business again. Tell everyone the story. Attempted robbery. Security responded. Suspects fled. No mention of cartel connections. Get the wounded to Dr. Sarno's clinic, not a hospital. Already arranged. And the woman? She was never here. Julian looked at me. You were visiting a friend in Queens. You know nothing about this. I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone, I protested. You don't have a choice. He moved to a wall panel, pressed something that made a section slide open, revealing a stairwell. Anthony, take her down to the garage. Keep her in the car until the police clear out. Anthony grabbed my elbow. I tried to resist, but he was stronger, pulling me toward the hidden stairs. The last thing I saw was Julian wrapping his bleeding arm with a towel, preparing to lie to authorities with the same calm he'd used when offering me dinner 2 weeks ago. The garage was underground, dark, smelling of concrete and motor oil. Anthony guided me to a black sedan and locked the doors from outside. Through tinted windows, I watched police lights flash blue and red against the walls. An hour crawled by. Then 2. My hands still shook. I kept seeing the security feed, the gunfire, Julian's blood on tissues I'd dropped somewhere in his office. When Anthony finally returned, dawn was breaking outside. It's handled. Police bought the robbery story. It helped that Julian's security team was fully licensed and handed over time-stamped camera footage within minutes. The uniforms wanted something clean they could write and clear. We gave them exactly that. Julian's arranging private security upgrades they suggested. He started the engine. But we can't stay here. Too exposed. Where are we going? Property upstate, Catskills region. More defensible, more isolated. He pulled out of the garage onto empty streets. Boss wants us there before full light. We drove through the city as it woke. Streets gradually filling with people heading to normal jobs, normal lives. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched them, envying their ignorance. Julian's SUV pulled up alongside us at a red light. Through the tinted glass, I could just make out his profile. He didn't look over, didn't acknowledge me, just stared straight ahead like a man driving toward something he couldn't avoid. The light changed. We drove north toward mountains I'd never seen, leaving the penthouse and whatever temporary safety it had offered behind. My phone buzzed with another text from Vanessa. I turned it off without reading. Some lies were easier to maintain in silence. The house emerged from morning mist, like something out of a Gothic novel. Not a mansion, but substantial. Stone and wood blending into the forest that pressed close on all sides. The Catskills stretched behind it, mountains layered in shades of green and gray that faded into cloud cover. "We're 2.5 hours from the city," Anthony said as we pulled up the gravel drive. "No neighbors within a mile. Cell service is spotty, but we've got satellite backup." Julian's SUV arrived minutes after ours. He climbed out, moving carefully, favoring the arm he'd injured. The bandage showed white beneath his rolled sleeve. Our eyes met across the driveway. Neither of us spoke. Inside, the house was surprisingly warm. Someone had prepared it in advance, lights on, heat running. 4 guards were already positioned at strategic points. They nodded to Julian, but didn't speak. The kind of men who understood silence was sometimes the best communication. "Second floor, end of the hall," Julian told me. "You'll have privacy." I took the stairs slowly, exhaustion finally catching up. The room was simple. Queen bed with a thick quilt, wooden dresser, window overlooking the forest. Nothing fancy, but clean and functional. I dropped my bag and sat on the bed, hands shaking. Sleep should have come easily after 36 hours of adrenaline. Instead, I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the attack. The sound of gunfire, Julian's blood on my hands, the certainty I was about to die in a penthouse that had stopped feeling temporary. When I finally drifted off, the nightmares found me immediately. Gunfire, running, my parents' car skidding off Route 26 while I watched from impossibly far away. Julian's face as bullets tore through him. I woke, gasping, sheets tangled around my legs, dawnlight just beginning to filter through the window. The pattern repeated itself for 3 days. I'd try to work, editing photos with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Every sound made me jump. A door closing, wind rattling windows, footsteps in the hall that were just Anthony checking security. Julian noticed but kept his distance, watching me with concern he didn't voice. By Wednesday, I forced myself outside. The forest beckoned, autumn colors painting the trees in fire. I grabbed my camera and walked until the house disappeared behind me. Found a stream cutting through rock, water so clear I could count stones on the bottom. I photographed everything. Light through leaves, water over moss. The patterns bark made on ancient trees. It was therapy, focusing on composition instead of fear. Behind the lens, I could breathe again. Julian found me there an hour later. Didn't speak, just sat on a fallen log and let me work. His presence should have felt intrusive. Instead, it anchored me, reminded me I wasn't alone in this nightmare. "Better?" he asked eventually. "Getting there." I lowered the camera. "How's your arm?" "Healing. You did good work with minimal supplies." I wasn't exactly thinking clearly at the time. Neither was I. He stood, offering a hand to help me up. "Dinner's ready." Anthony made pasta. Apparently that's his one domestic skill. The evenings developed a rhythm. The 3 of us at the table, 4 guards rotating shifts outside, conversations that started professional and drifted personal as the wine flowed. Anthony telling stories about Julian as a teenager, serious and driven even then. Julian countering with tales of Anthony's disastrous attempts at romance. I watched them interact, seeing the decades of history in shorthand glances and half-finished sentences. They weren't just employer and employee. They were brothers in everything but blood. "What about you?" Julian asked Wednesday evening. What were you like before the world got complicated? I was never uncomplicated. I pushed food around my plate. Even as a kid, I preferred watching to participating. My aunts used to worry I was too quiet, too internal. They kept signing me up for activities I'd photograph instead of joining. That why you became a photographer? That, and it's hard to be lonely when you're documenting other people's lives. The admission surprised me, though I guess that's just another form of loneliness. Julian's expression shifted. Understanding flickered there, raw and unguarded. I spent most of my 20s building walls so high nobody could see what was inside. Told myself it was strategic, maintaining distance. Really, I was just terrified of being vulnerable. Are you still terrified? Constantly. He held my gaze. Especially now. The air between us changed, charged with something we'd been ignoring for days. Anthony cleared his throat and excused himself, suddenly fascinated by security reports. That night, the storm rolled in around 10. Thunder shook the house, rain hammering against windows. The power cut out with a decisive click, plunging everything into darkness before the generators kicked in. Emergency lighting cast the house in dim amber glow. I found Julian in what passed for a library. Built-in shelves lined with books I suspected he'd never read. Leather furniture arranged around a fireplace that crackled with real flames. He stood by the window, glass of whiskey catching firelight, watching the storm tear through the trees. "Can't sleep?" I asked from the doorway, thinking. He didn't turn. About how many mistakes I've made getting you here. I crossed to him, stood close enough to feel heat radiating from his body. "I'm not your responsibility." You became my responsibility the moment I decided to investigate your parents, instead of letting the past stay buried. That was my choice too. I could have walked away after dinner at the restaurant, could have refused to come to the penthouse, could have said no a dozen times. I touched his shoulder, felt him tense. "I'm here because I chose to be." He turned then, setting the glass aside. "Why?" "Because you're the first person in 19 years who took my questions seriously. Because you looked at that photo and saw a child who deserved answers, not a liability to be managed." I stepped closer. "Because when you touch me, I don't feel alone anymore." His hand came up, cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone like he had in the penthouse before Anthony interrupted. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably. I've involved you in a war, nearly got you killed, and yet here I am, still choosing this. Still choosing you." The kiss happened slowly. His mouth found mine with deliberate care, testing, asking permission I'd already granted. I pressed closer, hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him down. The kiss deepened, became urgent, became everything we'd been holding back for 2 weeks. His arms went around me, lifting me against him. My back hit the bookshelf. Old leather and wood solid behind me. His body pinned mine, mouth moving from my lips to my jaw, to the sensitive spot below my ear that made me gasp. "Haley, don't stop," I breathed. "Please don't stop." The library door slammed open. Anthony stood there, tablet in hand, face grim. "I've got news. It's about the property." Julian pulled back, jaw tight with frustration. "This better be critical." "It is." Anthony crossed to the desk, setting down the tablet. "Remember that burned document Haley found mentioning a trust? I tracked it." I straightened my clothes, trying to regulate my breathing. Julian moved to the desk, all business despite the heat still burning in his eyes. "Your father registered a will 1 week before he died," Anthony continued. "Left a commercial property in Manhattan to you through an obscure trust structure. The trust was controlled by a lawyer named Gerald Simmons, who coincidentally died 3 years ago. I never knew about any property," I said. "That's because Simmons never told you. He kept collecting fees while the property generated income that went straight into accounts you couldn't access." Anthony pulled up documents. "The property is currently leased to a shipping company. That company is a front for the cartel's money laundering operation." The room tilted. "My parents' property is being used to clean drug money? Has been for 19 years. If you file a legal claim as the legitimate heir, you expose the entire operation. The cartel loses millions, faces federal investigation, and their whole northeastern structure collapses." Julian leaned against the desk, processing. That's why they want her dead. Not because of what her parents knew, but because of what she owns. Exactly. She's not a witness to old crimes. She's a time bomb threatening their current operation. I sank into a chair, mind racing. So what do? Julian looked at me, something calculating in his expression. We make you too dangerous to kill. If you file that claim publicly, through legitimate legal channels, with media attention, your death becomes the worst possible outcome for them. It would trigger automatic investigations, freeze their assets, destroy everything they've built. You want to use me as bait. I want to make you untouchable. He crossed to where I sat. It's risky, but it's the only way to end this permanently. I thought about the photo Julian had carried for 19 years. About my parents. Killed for knowing too much or owning too much. About the little girl in the yellow dress who'd never understood why her world shattered. I pulled the photo from my pocket. You should have this back. You've kept it safe all these years. Julian's expression softened. It belongs to you. It always did. Your father must have given it to Dante for safekeeping, hoping you'd find your way back to your own history. Then let's make a copy. One for each of us. A reminder of why we're doing this. He took my hand, squeezed once. Deal. We'll scan it tomorrow. Frame them both. Your past doesn't have to be carried by just one person anymore. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, we started planning how to turn me from a target into a weapon the cartel couldn't afford to fire. Julian's lawyer arrived Thursday morning. Richard Brennan, 50-something with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases most people considered unwinnable. He spread documents across the dining table like a general planning a siege. The property claim is straightforward legally, he said, tapping a finger on the deed. Your father's will is legitimate, properly witnessed, filed with the county clerk. The trust structure was designed to protect the asset, but since the trustee is deceased and you're the sole beneficiary, we have clear grounds. How long will it take? I asked. Filing? 2 days. Resolution? Months, normally. But given the publicity we're planning, the current occupants will likely vacate before we ever see a courtroom. He looked at Julian. You're certain about the journalist angle? Michael Torres is reliable. Former investigative reporter for The Times, now freelance. He's been looking for a story big enough to break into national syndication. Julian leaned back in his chair. We feed him the address, financial irregularities at the shipping company, connections to known shell corporations. He does the rest. And if the FBI doesn't bite, they will. Torres knows how to frame stories that force official action. Public pressure, media scrutiny. The Bureau can't ignore money laundering on this scale once it's front-page news. I listened to them discuss strategy like it was a chess game, moving pieces across a board I was only beginning to understand. My life, my safety, my future. All dependent on convincing strangers that my claim was legitimate while simultaneously exposing criminals who'd already tried to kill me. I have a condition, I said, interrupting their planning. Both men looked at me. When the property sells, I want the proceeds to establish a foundation. For victims of organized crime, specifically children who've lost parents, medical expenses, education costs, counseling. The things my aunts struggled to provide because insurance companies and government agencies don't care about collateral damage. Richard blinked. That's a significant decision. The property's value is estimated at $5 million minimum. I know what it's worth. I also know my parents died protecting something, and I'm not going to profit from their deaths. This money goes to helping kids like I was. Kids who deserve better than being forgotten. Julian's expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to respect. How much do you want to keep? $3 million to the foundation. The rest for living expenses, starting over when this is done. That's fair. More than fair, Richard said quietly. Most people in your position would take everything and run. I'm not most people. The next morning, we drove back to the city. Not the penthouse. A neutral office in Midtown where Richard filed the paperwork with a clerk who barely glanced at me. Just another case in a system that processed thousands daily. By noon, my claim was officially registered, public record, impossible to quietly bury. Torres received his tip that afternoon. Julian never told me exactly what evidence was planted or how, but by Sunday evening the story broke. Shipping company fronts. Massive money laundering operation, screamed the headline across every major news site. Torres had done his homework. Financial records, testimony from anonymous sources, the property's ownership trail leading back to my parents and forward to shell corporations with cartel connections. The article was meticulous, damning, and most importantly, it named the specific address. The FBI issued a statement Monday morning announcing a formal investigation. Federal agents descended on the property by Tuesday. News cameras captured everything. Men in suits carrying boxes of evidence, police tape cordoning off the building, official statements about ongoing operations. The lawyer disappeared, Anthony reported Wednesday morning. Gerald Simmons's son found his apartment empty. No signs of struggle, just gone. Neighbors saw him leave with 2 men yesterday afternoon. Dead? I asked. Almost certainly. The cartel doesn't leave loose ends. The thought should have bothered me more than it did. A man was probably dead because of actions I'd set in motion. But Simmons had profited from my parents' murders for 19 years, had kept me from inheritance that could have changed my life. I couldn't summon sympathy for him. By the end of the week, the cartel had evacuated the property. Torres published a follow-up piece tracking the financial losses, conservative estimates putting it at $12 million in cash alone, plus untold amounts in disrupted operations and frozen accounts. The entire Northeastern distribution network was scrambling to relocate, burning resources and exposing vulnerabilities. Christopher Vega is under pressure from his superiors, Anthony said Friday evening. Intercepted communications show they're blaming him for the security breach. He's desperate. Desperate enough to do something stupid? Julian asked. Already has. He's put out a contract on Haley. $500,000 to anyone who brings proof of death. My stomach dropped. So we're back where we started. Not quite. Julian pulled up something on his tablet. I spent the last 3 days establishing insurance. False digital trails suggesting you have automated systems set to release information if you die. Names, dates, financial records that would burn operations across 6 states. It's all fabricated, but the threat is believable. Will that stop them? It'll make them think twice. Killing you becomes the nuclear option. They'd rather negotiate, find another solution, or wait you out hoping you'll make a mistake. But Vega didn't wait. Saturday morning, Anthony intercepted a communication that changed everything. He's trying to negotiate directly with you, Anthony told Julian, phone still pressed to his ear. Wants a meeting, says he can explain everything, offer compensation, make this go away quietly. Julian's jaw tightened. He's panicking, losing control. His superiors are probably demanding action and he's grasping at any option. It's also revealing his location. The message came from a phone we can trace. I watched understanding pass between them. This wasn't about negotiation. It was about Vega making a fatal error. Don't engage directly, Julian said. Pass the information to the Guerrero faction. They've wanted Vega's territory for years. Let them know he's vulnerable, distracted, making desperate moves. Anthony nodded and disappeared to make calls. Julian turned to me, expression carefully neutral. It'll be over within days, maybe a week. Vega won't survive what's coming. Because we're setting him up to be killed by his own people. Because he made choices that put him at war with rivals who don't forgive weakness. We're simply providing information. What they do with it isn't our responsibility. The rationalization was thin, but I understood the logic. Direct action meant direct risk. This way, the cartel tore itself apart while we stayed safely removed from the violence. 4 days later, news broke about a body found in a warehouse in New Jersey. Multiple gunshot wounds, no identification. But Anthony confirmed what official channels wouldn't. Christopher Vega was dead, executed by people he'd once called allies. That evening, Julian found me on the back porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He sat beside me, close, but not touching. It's done. The immediate threat is neutralized. FBI investigation will take months, but the cartel's already moving operations out of state. You're no longer valuable enough to risk coming after. I should have felt relief. Instead, I just felt tired. What happens now? That's your choice. I can arrange new identity, relocation money, completely clean break. You'd disappear so thoroughly even I couldn't find you. Or," he paused, "or we figure out what comes next together. Why would you want that? I'm a photographer with trust issues and trauma I haven't even begun to process. You're a man who runs an empire I still don't fully understand. We don't make sense. No, we don't." He finally looked at me. "But I haven't felt this alive in years. Haven't wanted to build something instead of just maintaining what already exists. You did that. Changed how I see everything. I thought about the girl in the yellow dress, lost and alone. About my aunts who'd raised me to be practical, self-sufficient, careful. About spending 27 years watching life through a camera lens instead of living it. I need to think about it. Take tonight, tomorrow, however long you need." He stood. "Whatever you decide, you're safe. That's not conditional on anything." After he left, I sat watching stars emerge one by one, trying to imagine the futures he'd offered. Running, hiding, starting over alone, or staying, facing whatever this thing between us was becoming. The answer should have been obvious. The smart choice, the safe choice. But I'd stopped making safe choices the moment I picked up his wallet in a parking garage 3 weeks ago, and every choice since then had led me here. To a man who'd protected me, challenged me, shown me a version of myself I hadn't known existed. By the time I went inside, I knew what I'd tell him in the morning. I found Julian in the kitchen the next morning. He stood by the coffee maker, watching the dark liquid drip into the carafe with the kind of focus most people reserved for important decisions. He sensed me before I spoke, shoulders tensing slightly. "I'm not running," I said. He turned, studied my face. "You're certain?" "No, but I'm choosing this anyway. Choosing you. This insane situation. Whatever comes next. I've spent my whole life playing it safe, keeping distance, documenting other people's happiness instead of finding my own. I'm done with that." Something in his expression cracked open. Not a smile exactly. More like relief he'd been holding back for days. "It won't be easy. My world doesn't come with normal relationship problems. Good thing I'm not looking for normal." He crossed to me, cupped my face in both hands. The kiss was slow, deliberate. Nothing like the frantic urgency in the library. This was a promise, an acknowledgement of what we were choosing together. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "We do this right. You go back to Brooklyn. Resume your life. I don't control your schedule or dictate your choices. We build something real, not just survival instinct dressed up as connection. Deal. But I have one condition first, which is, I need to see Vanessa, face to face. She's been my best friend for almost a decade. I can't keep lying to her." Julian nodded slowly. "How much do you plan to tell her?" "The truth. Not the details, but the broad strokes. That I was in danger, that you helped me, that it's resolved now. She deserves at least that much honesty." 2 days later, I sat across from Vanessa in a cafe near Prospect Park, the same place we'd met weeks ago when this nightmare was just beginning. She'd ordered her usual quinoa bowl but wasn't eating it, just pushing food around while glaring at me with justified anger. 3 weeks, Haley. 3 weeks of texts claiming you were sick, then traveling, then dealing with family stuff. I know you don't have family left except me, so which part was the lie? Her voice was sharp, hurt bleeding through the fury. All of it. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, needing something solid. "I'm sorry. I was protecting you by keeping you out of it." "Out of what, exactly?" I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Nothing prepared me for how hard it was to actually say the words. "Remember when I told you I found something strange? It was connected to my parents' deaths. Dangerous people got involved. Someone helped me get through it safely, but I couldn't tell you without putting you at risk." Vanessa's expression shifted from anger to concern. "Someone hurt you?" "Tried to. They failed." I met her eyes. "It's over now. The people who threatened me are gone. But I had to disappear for a while, and I couldn't explain without making you a target too. This someone who helped you, is he the reason you look different?" I blinked. "Different how?" less alone. Like you finally figured out there's more to life than observing it through a camera lens. She leaned back, arms crossed. I want to be angry. I am angry, but I'm also relieved you're alive and apparently involved with someone who puts that look on your face. His name is Julian. It's complicated. Everything about you is complicated, Haley. That's not new. She finally picked up her fork. But I need you to promise me something. If you're ever in trouble again, you tell me. Even if it's just, I can't explain, but I'm safe. I can't help if I don't know you need it. I promise. And Vanessa, thank you for not giving up on me. You're stuck with me. Someone has to make sure you eat vegetables and occasionally leave your apartment. She paused. This Julian. Do I get to meet him? Eventually, when we figure out what normal looks like. The property sale moved faster than Richard Brennan predicted. The publicity, FBI investigation, and criminal implications scared off most potential buyers, but a development company looking to renovate bought it for $4.8 million. After legal fees and back taxes, I cleared $4.5 million. I sat in Richard's office signing paperwork that changed my life with a pen that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. The foundation is established, Richard said, sliding another document across his desk. $2 million initial funding, additional $1 million in reserve for operational costs. You'll need a board of directors, but I've taken the liberty of contacting several organizations that work with children affected by organized crime. They're eager to partner. What about the rest? After taxes, you'll have approximately $1.2 million remaining. Invested conservatively, that's $40,000 to $50,000 annual income without touching principal. You'll never be wealthy, but you'll be comfortable. Comfortable. The word felt foreign. I'd spent my adult life calculating whether I could afford both groceries and electricity. Now I was signing papers that meant never worrying about rent again. I want to name it after my parents, I said. The Morgan Family Foundation. For kids who lost parents to violence. Consider it done. That evening, Julian found me in the guest room at the Catskills house, staring at financial documents I couldn't quite process. You gave away most of your inheritance, he said from the doorway. I used it for something that matters. There's a difference. He sat beside me on the bed. Most people wouldn't see it that way. I'm not most people. My parents died protecting something they believed in. This money came from their deaths, from 19 years of corruption and criminal activity. Using it to help kids like I was feels like honoring them properly. Julian picked up one of the documents, scanned it. The foundation structure is solid. Richard did good work. He mentioned you covered his fees. Consider it an investment in something worthwhile. I leaned against him, exhausted by paperwork and emotion. What happens to your business now? With the cartel disrupted, Christopher dead, everything exposed. We adapt. Move operations, restructure territory agreements, rebuild what was damaged. But I'm also reconsidering some aspects. He paused. You made me think about legacy differently. What I'm building versus what I'm maintaining. Whether power for its own sake is worth the cost. That sounds like progress. Don't expect miracles. I'm not suddenly going legitimate or retiring to become a philanthropist. But maybe there are smarter ways to operate. Less violence, more strategic thinking. Businesses that don't rely on human suffering. It wasn't redemption. Wasn't even close to the moral high ground. But it was movement in a direction that didn't make me hate myself for caring about him. The next week passed in strange normalcy. I worked on foundation planning, consulted with organizations about program structure, and slowly rebuilt my photography client list. Julian split time between the Catskills and the city, handling business I deliberately didn't ask about. At night, we'd sit by the fire talking about futures that felt more possible than they had any right to be. Anthony reported that the FBI investigation was proceeding exactly as planned. Charges were being prepared, assets frozen, operational networks dismantled. The cartel's northeastern presence was effectively destroyed. Any retaliation attempts? Julian asked. None. The internal message has been clear. Haley Turner is off limits. The cost of touching her is too high. Anthony glanced at me. You've become more valuable alive than dead. Congratulations on weaponizing yourself. That's the strangest compliment I've ever received. In our world, it's the highest form of respect. 2 weeks after Christopher's death, Julian took me back to Brooklyn. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it, dust-coating surfaces, mail piled behind the door. It felt like stepping into a museum of my former life. "Security system is upgraded," Julian said, showing me the new panel. "Cameras on all entry points, direct line to my people, panic button that brings response in under 3 minutes. This feels excessive for a photographer in Brooklyn. Humor me. At least until we're certain there's no residual threat." I agreed, because arguing felt pointless, and because a small part of me was still afraid. That night, sleeping in my own bed for the first time in a month, I dreamed of the girl in the yellow dress. But this time, she wasn't alone. Someone stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, protecting her from storms she couldn't see coming. I woke to sunlight and my phone buzzing with a text from Julian. "Dinner tonight?" Actual date. Not crisis management. I smiled and typed back, "Pick me up at 7. Maybe this was what moving forward looked like. Not forgetting the past or pretending trauma didn't leave scars. Just choosing to build something new anyway. One careful step at a time. 3 months changed everything and nothing at all. The Morgan Family Foundation officially launched on a Tuesday in October. Small ceremony, just me, Richard Brennan, and representatives from 3 victim advocacy organizations. We stood in a modest office space in Lower Manhattan, cutting a ribbon nobody would photograph, celebrating something that felt more important than anything I'd accomplished in 27 years. $2 million initial funding, with operational structures in place to begin accepting applications next month. Richard explained to the assembled group. Priority will be given to children under 18 who've lost parents to organized crime, gang violence, or drug-related homicides. Medical expenses, education costs, counseling services. I watched them discuss logistics and felt my parents' presence like a weight on my shoulders. Not oppressive. Grounding. This money had come from their deaths, from 19 years of criminals profiting off property that should have been mine. Now it would help kids who deserved better than being collateral damage in wars they didn't choose. After the ceremony, I walked to the site alone. The property itself was unrecognizable now, gutted and under renovation. Construction barriers hid whatever transformation was happening inside, but I stood on the sidewalk and took a photo anyway. Documentation of an ending that became a beginning. My phone buzzed. "Julian, how did it go?" "Better than expected. They're excited about the possibilities. You should be proud. Not many people would give away millions. I kept enough to be comfortable. That's more than most people get." I paused. "Dinner tonight? My place or yours?" "Mine. I'm testing a new lens and need natural light for portraits. So I'm your test subject now. You have good bone structure. Don't let it go to your head." His laugh was warm through the phone. 7 o'clock. I'll bring wine. That was how it worked between us now. Dinners and weekends, separate apartments and shared moments. He'd restructured parts of his business, shifting away from operations that relied on human suffering. Not transformation. Evolution. He was still Julian Fioraldi, still controlled territory, and made decisions I chose not to examine too closely. But he was also the man who'd protected me, who called just to hear my voice, who fell asleep on my couch reading while I edited photos past midnight. My photography work had shifted too. Corporate headshots paid bills, but my passion went to a new project. Documenting families affected by violence, telling stories that news cycles forgot. I'd spent September photographing children in victim services programs, capturing resilience that shouldn't have been necessary, but existed anyway. The foundation gave me access to subjects I'd never have met otherwise. Kids like I'd been, trying to understand why the world had turned cruel. Some wanted their photos taken. Others just wanted someone to listen. I did both. Vanessa still hadn't completely forgiven me for the weeks of lies, but we were rebuilding. Coffee every Sunday, her screening Julian with protective suspicion that made me love her more. She'd met him twice, brief encounters where she assessed him like a subject under scientific observation. "He's intense," she'd said after the second meeting, "and clearly dangerous. But he looks at you like you're the only real thing in his world. That's dramatic even for you. I call it like I see it. Just promise me if he ever hurts you, I get to key his car before you disappear into witness protection or whatever. Deal. My apartment in Brooklyn had become home again, though the upgraded security system reminded me daily that normal was relative. Julian's men maintained discreet surveillance, enough to respond quickly without making me feel imprisoned. I'd grown used to the shadow presence, even grateful for it on nights when old nightmares surfaced. The nightmares came less frequently now. Therapy helped. Weekly sessions with Dr. Reeves, who specialized in trauma and didn't flinch when I mentioned cartels and gunfire. She helped me understand that survival wasn't the same as healing. The carrying fear didn't make me weak. You're allowed to be angry, she'd said during our last session, about what was stolen from you, about having to grow up too fast, about being pulled into violence you didn't choose. I'm more tired than angry. Tired of looking over my shoulder, of calculating risk in every decision. That's normal given what you've experienced. But Haley, you're also building something new. The foundation, your relationship, the documentary work. Those are choices moving you forward, not just reactions to the past. She was right. For the first time since my parents died, I felt like I was living instead of just surviving. The documentary project led me back to my grandmother's property upstate. The house had been sold years ago, but the new owners allowed me access to photograph the backyard. The same fence, the same apple tree, older but still standing. I brought my camera and the courage I'd been gathering for weeks. Set up the tripod in the exact spot where someone had photographed me at 8 years old in that yellow dress. This time, I wore jeans and a charcoal sweater, hair loose, expression steady rather than confused. The self-timer clicked. I held position for 10 frames, capturing something I couldn't quite name. Not replacement of the past. Acknowledgement that the girl in the yellow dress had survived, had grown, had found her way back to this place with scars, but also strength. I showed Julian the photos that evening at his Tribeca penthouse. He'd moved back after security upgrades, though he spent most weekends at my place or the Catskills house. He studied the images in silence, the old Polaroid beside my laptop for comparison, the yellow dress and the contemporary portrait, separated by 19 years, and everything that had happened between. You're planning to exhibit these, he said finally, as part of a larger series. Before and after, trauma and survival, the children we were, and the people we became. It's powerful work, Haley. Important. I saved the files and closed my laptop. I want to frame both photos for your office. The original Polaroid your brother gave you, and this new one, side by side. Why my office? Because you kept that photo safe for 19 years when you didn't have to. Because you saw a child who deserved answers, not a problem to be solved. Because sometimes secrets we carry aren't burdens. They're bridges to people we were always meant to meet. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability breaking through control. He pulled me close, pressed his forehead against mine. I was 15 when Dante died. Spent 19 years wondering why he thought that photo mattered enough to make me promise to keep it safe. Now I know. Do you regret it? Everything that happened? I regret the danger. I regret not moving faster, being smarter, protecting you better. But meeting you, learning your story, watching you transform tragedy into purpose. He pulled back enough to meet my eyes. That I'll never regret. We had the photos framed together. Museum quality, side by side in his office where he'd see them daily. The girl in the yellow dress who'd lost everything, and the woman who'd survived to build something new. Not redemption, not forgetting. Just proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. 6 months after everything began, I stood in Julian's office looking at those frames while he took a call. Anthony was there too. Reporting on business I still chose not to understand completely. The operation had changed, shifted toward less violent revenue streams, but it remained what it was. I'd made peace with dating a man whose world operated outside conventional morality. The foundation approved its first 12 grants today, I told them when Julian ended his call. Kids in 5 different states, youngest is 6, oldest is 17. That's good work, Anthony said. Real impact. My parents would have liked knowing their deaths led to something beyond tragedy. that the property criminals used for 19 years is now funding recovery for other victims. Julian crossed to where I stood, wrapped arms around me from behind. Your parents would be proud of who you became despite everything. So would your aunts. I leaned into him, studying the photos. Sometimes I wonder what they'd think about all this. About you. About the choices I've made. And what conclusion do you reach? That they raised me to survive, to be practical, and self-sufficient, and careful. But they also taught me that family isn't always blood, that protecting people you love matters more than following rules, and that sometimes the safest choice is trusting dangerous people who prove themselves when it counts. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. I turned in his arms. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with, even if it doesn't make logical sense to anyone else. Outside, the city spread beneath us, millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to map. Somewhere in that chaos, other children were losing parents, other people were making impossible choices, other secrets were being kept that would take years to understand. But in this moment, in this space, the girl in the yellow dress and the woman she'd become existed side by side. Not separate, continuous, proof that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about finding meaning in the scars, purpose in the pain, and sometimes unexpectedly, love in the unlikeliest places. Julian kissed the top of my head. Ready to go home? Which home? Whichever one feels right tonight. I smiled against his chest. Brooklyn. I promised Vanessa Sunday brunch and she's still convinced you're secretly a supervillain. I appreciate her commitment to your well-being. She just wants me happy. And are you? Happy? I considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, I'd been hiding from cartels, fighting for survival, terrified of every shadow. Now I was building foundations, creating art, loving someone who saw past my defenses to the person I'd been afraid to become. Getting there, I said. One careful step at a time, and maybe that was all any of us could do. Take the broken pieces of our pasts, the scars that marked us, the secrets we carried, and build something new. Not perfect, not safe, but real and ours and worth fighting to protect.